All right, cool. I think we are just getting some final people filtering in. Let's go ahead and get started. Will, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Addison. All right, well, first of all, thanks to everyone who's joined so far. Today, the webinar is getting started with the Miro Developer Platform. As you might have guessed from the title, we'll be focusing on our developer platform, which is our comprehensive solution for developers to build apps and integrations on top of Miro, whether that's in the Miro board directly or done from a third-party app, or perhaps both. With that in mind, we hope to enable all of you to start building apps or integrations that empower our global community of over 35 million users today. And for those of you who are new to the Miro platform, this webinar assumes prior knowledge is not necessarily that large. You may not know everything, but that's not to say that those of you who are familiar won't also get something out of this as well as we get into examples and inspiration. And just one last note before we dive into the agenda, we have enabled the Q&A function in Zoom, and we encourage you guys to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar. Our team will be around to answer these in real time. And at the end of the webinar, we've set aside some time to answer any questions we don't get to or any new questions. So with that, we'll dive into the agenda.
Cool. So the rest of the webinar is going to look a little something like this. Will and I will give a quick introduction about ourselves and what we do at Miro, specifically with the Miro Developer Platform. We'll give everyone here a good overview of the developer platform and all the different components. Keeping that in mind, we're also going to give you some demos and, as Will mentioned before, go into some inspirational apps and cool things that you can do with the platform, some things that we've seen already. Cover a little bit about different app types. And as mentioned as well, we'll dive in at the end into a Q&A, wrap up, and hopefully answer any questions that might have come up during the session. Cool. Will, you want to give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Addison. So yeah, I'm Will Bishop, a developer advocate here at Miro. A little bit about myself. I'm really passionate about all things API related and the interconnectedness of the web. And yeah, I can't wait to share that kind of experience with you guys here as we learn about the platform.
My name's Addison. I'm also a developer advocate here at Miro. Yeah, I'm also really excited to show a lot of the different things, like I said, we've seen in our community, but also just things we've seen built with the Miro Developer Platform, because I was definitely blown away already since our launch earlier this year on how cool some of the apps that we've seen built. But I think without further ado, we are going to dive into a little bit more about the platform.
Perfect. So yes, the reason we're all here, the Miro Developer Platform. So when we speak of the Miro Developer Platform, we are referring to the power of our Web SDK, our REST API, and our live embed. So these three components make up the whole developer platform. And I'll just quickly run through each of them kind of high level. So the Web SDK, this is a packaged solution for building a front-end app, typically directly in Miro, accessible from a Miro board kind of plugin. The REST API, is a comprehensive suite of API endpoints that allows you to build a more back-end oriented integration or application, perhaps not necessarily directly from the Miro UI, but most typically from a third-party app. And then we have the live embed. This allows you to embed a Miro board directly into a site or app of your own using a lightweight JavaScript-based solution. You can use these separately or together. I will note that it's very common to see people use the REST API in conjunction with the Web SDK, or maybe all three at once, but that's not to say that you can't use them individually as well. And then, yeah, diving into a little bit of the history of our platform. So the Miro Developer Platform 2.0 was launched just recently in May. This was after about 5 or so months of beta, where we collected feedback, got feature requests, understood things that needed to be addressed before our public launch based on feedback from our community and perhaps some of you here today. And prior to that, we'd been working on this second version of our platform for about a year or so. So we're super excited today to talk about kind of the ins and outs of the platform and get you guys up to speed on all of the latest capabilities. And just one note, most of the things we cover today are going to be also accessible to you at developers.miro.com. That's where our documentation lives, our reference guides, tutorials, and all these kinds of things. So we're going to be working a lot in the documentation today, but just know that you can find it on your own afterwards as well.
Cool. Yeah, as was mentioned, we're going to be covering the developer portal quite a lot and referencing it a lot. So even after the webinar, you should have a pretty good kind of map of our documentation, where to find things, where to look for things, and how to use it in general. But as Will mentioned, we have 3 different parts of the Miro platform. And the first one that we're going to cover today is the Web SDK. So the Web SDK allows you to create custom apps inside of Miro. You may have seen it before, especially if you've been a Miro user in the past. All you need in order to create Web SDK apps is a Miro account and an open Miro board. You will also need a Miro developer account and to be able to create developer apps. We are going to cover a little bit about that. We'll cover the flow as well if you haven't created a developer app in the past, so you'll know kind of how to get started with that. And we'll even explore a little bit about building an app and exploring some of the ways that you can create your own custom UI within Miro. But before we go ahead and dive into all of that, we're going to lead a little workshop on how you can go ahead and use the Web SDK quickly. So the fastest way to use the Web SDK is right within a Miro board. So if you have used Miro before and you are using and working in a Miro board, all you need to do is open up the developer console over on the right, and you'll be able to start using different features from the Web SDK. If you're using Chrome, you can go to the View menu, head over to Developers, and hit JavaScript console right here. If you're using a different browser, such as Firefox or Safari, it's a very similar workflow. It's normally under the View or the Developer menu in the other tools as well. As mentioned, all of the methods and different things that we're going to be using for the Web SDK, but also the REST API and the live embed options are, you can find all the information from our developer platform at developers.miro.com. Including all of the different methods that I'm going to be using in the Web SDK section here. So as I mentioned, you can go ahead and use the Web SDK right from the browser console. If we head over to our documentation and we look under the Web SDK section here, we can go ahead and find the Web SDK reference, and we have a list of all of the different things that we can interact with on a Miro board. What's really cool, and I'm going to demo this in just a sec, is not only can you add and interact with things like images or sticky notes, some native Miro components, but you can also manipulate and play with other things that are native to the Miro board, such as like the viewport, some of the extension points like opening a panel, and a lot more. The first thing that I want to show, though, is how we can go ahead and insert something onto a board. So I have a couple different code examples here. And the first one that I want to demonstrate is adding a sticky note onto the board. We can also, again, find all this documentation under the sticky note section here. And you can also copy and paste this right from the docs. But if I head back to the board that I was working in before, paste that code snippet that I had before, and hit enter, you'll see that we are able to very quickly add a sticky note onto the board. You can also customize a lot of different features on here, such as the content, even the style, rotation, position, shape, and so on. And you can find all these properties also in the documentation. So as I mentioned, sticky note is a pretty primitive item that you can add to the board, and you can do a lot more than just sticky notes. Second one I want to show is also an image. There's a couple, each of these items as well that you add to the board all have their own specific properties that you can go ahead and add. So for instance, an image has a specific one for the URL of the image that we're adding. And just to show you that here, if I paste the code snippet, you'll see that we added the image in. As I mentioned as well before, though, is not only can we add and manipulate, update, delete different items on a board, we can also manipulate things like the viewport or other extension points. And that's the next thing that I want to show. Just to show where this is in the documentation, if you're interested in exploring more. The next one I'm going to show is interacting with the viewport. And we can zoom to any of the items that we have on our board. I already have this copied here, so let me go ahead and paste this back into my console. And just to show you, if I'm maybe on a different part of my board and I hit this, because I passed in the sticky note that we defined earlier in the console, it's going to zoom to that. And it would do the same thing as well if we passed it the image variable instead of the sticky note here. Last but not least, you can also interact and listen to different events. So I mentioned that you can interact and listen to events like clicking on an icon, so you can open a different panel. But a really cool one is also being able to listen to events that are specific to different items on the board. For instance, if we want to listen to an event, if we click on or select this image, we'll be able to, well, do a lot of different things. But for now, I'm just going to log the response on what item that I have. So first I need to initialize this in the console. But now if I go ahead and select this, you'll see it's already saying it's subscribed to the event, which is from this one. And it's going to log the different items that I have selected, which in our case is that image that I have selected from before, from the URL, title, and etc. So as I mentioned before, this is a really cool way that you can build a lot of native apps in Miro that interact with more than just the items on a board. And you can do a lot of really cool things, which I'm going to show you in just a sec. Let me go back here then. A little bit more about the Web SDK and what it looks like. As I mentioned before, SDK apps have custom UI, and you'll find most of them in the sidebar. So if you have used any of the apps over here, such as this one, which we'll explore a little bit later, this is all built using the Web SDK, and we've customized all of the different UI that you have here. We even, we go back here, have a specific library that allows you to build custom UI for your SDK apps. It's called Miro Tone. You can find it in our documentation or at mirotone.xyz. And you'll find all the docs on how to use this, including things like colors, typography, spacing, and all of the components available to you to use to build your own UI. There's pretty much everything that you would need in order to build a really sophisticated and complex app with more and more components and different layouts coming on the way. If you're looking for examples and inspiration, well, we're going to cover a few more in the rest of this webinar, but you can always head to our marketplace or our GitHub app examples as well under miro.com/marketplace or on our GitHub under Miro App. And we have a huge repository of different app examples, which I'll show off in just a second. But the next thing that I want to show off is the actual flow of creating an app and using that inside of Miro. Because so far, all we've done is actually just interact with the SDK via the console. But as I mentioned, most of the apps that you're going to be building will have some sort of custom UI and most likely are going to be launched from the sidebar that you see over here on the left. So in order to do that, we're going to start by bootstrapping an app with a CLI tool from our command line interface called Create Miro App. In order to get started with this, I'm going to open up a new terminal. And again, all of this can be found inside of our documentation. If you go to build your first Hello World app, you'll find all of the information and a lot of the things that I'm going to be doing right now in here, or under the npm package, again, create Miro app. So if I go back to the terminal and I paste in the first command that it had me do first, what this is going to do is allow me to create a new app. Actually, I first need to install the latest version. It's going to allow me to name it. So I'm going to do webinar app. It'll ask you to choose a framework. Right now we have just vanilla JavaScript, React, and Vue starters. And I'm a React developer, so I'm going to choose React. And I also do like TypeScript, so I'm going to choose a TypeScript flavor as well. So depending on your needs and your level of knowledge with JavaScript, you can start to build a lot of different types of apps. And Miro Tone is supported in all of the different starters. As we get this installed and created, I'm going to change my directory into this app. Let's clear this so we have it back up at the top. I'm going to run yarn to make sure all of my dependencies are installed. And after this is done, I'm going to open this up in my code editor, VS Code. So this is the boilerplate that we get for the React TypeScript starter that I had chosen. You can go ahead and explore this and see all the different methods here. But what I'm also going to do is start, I'm going to start the terminal back here. So we have this running, and we can go ahead and see it on a localhost link. If I go back to the browser and I go to localhost 3000, you can see the app is running locally, which is perfect. This is exactly what we want. But the thing is we don't only want this running in the browser, we also want this to be running in the sidebar. So when we open it, we'll actually click and show the UI that we're building here. In order for us to do this, what we will need to do is create a new app inside of our developer team. You can again follow the build your first Hello World app to find all the exact steps. And the first thing, one of the first prerequisites that you need to do is make sure you have a developer team created. You can do so by clicking the link inside of here. And after doing so, you'll notice you have a developer team from your Miro dashboard. Again, I've already done this, so I won't have to go through this step. But the main difference between the development team and your normal team is in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have the option to start building an apps. And this is the next thing you're going to want to do after you go ahead and create your developer team. So if I head inside of here, you'll see a list of any apps that you've created before. But for our purposes, we're going to create a new app. I'm going to call this webinar app. You can only install it inside of a development team, which is the one that I have here. And if you are using the REST API, you can choose this option here, which I think Will is going to cover a little bit in the next section. I'm just going to be focusing on some of the SDK specific settings that we have inside of here. And the main one that we're focused on is the app URL here. So this is the URL that it points to for where your app is running on. And because I have this running locally at localhost 3000, you might have guessed I'm going to go ahead and put this inside of the app URL. After you're done developing your app, and you might deploy it somewhere, whether that's your own hosting solution or somewhere else, all you need to do to flip this to the production version is make sure you change the URL to wherever it's being hosted. There's also a few other options and settings for the REST API OAuth 2 flow specifically, but the only other ones that are specific to the SDK are the permissions. And we want our SDK app to have permissions for the board to read and write. You can choose whatever other ones that you want as well, including things like listening to the microphone, recording your screen, or your webcam, which could definitely enable some really, really cool apps. And if you are also interested in adding an icon, you can do so, or updating the name inside of the display information. After you have all of your different settings set up and exactly how you want them, all you're going to need to do is finally click this install app. It'll ask what team you want to get this installed into. I'm going to install my app into the development team and authorize it. And after we do so, we'll now have this app available for us inside of our development team, any board that we have inside of the development team. So this sandbox board that I'm in right now already is inside of the development team. You can also notice it is because we have a watermark right here that says it is part of the development team. And if I head to where some of my plugins are, you'll see that I have a new app called Webinar App. And by opening it, it's going to start firing some of the code and with the custom UI here. So just by following the create Miro app, let me also close this one so it's a little bit easier to follow. Just by following the create Miro app, you can bootstrap an app really quickly and start to build in whatever framework or language that you're interested in using. So really fast to get started, and simply by changing this is going to update it inside of the template. As I mentioned before, we do have a lot of other examples and tutorials underneath the Web SDK section specifically, where you're going to be able to learn a lot more about the specific features that the Web SDK allows you to do, and even find examples and links to our app examples that we have on GitHub, which is all open source for you to clone and try out yourself. So hopefully this was a pretty good overview of the Web SDK and gives you a little bit better of an idea on some of the things that you can build. So now I'm going to pass it over to Will, who's going to talk a little bit more about the next piece and component of our developer platform.
Great, thanks, Addison. So as Addison just gave us a great overview of the Web SDK, I'd like to do the same for the REST API. So in order to use the REST API, all you need is a Miro account, a developer team like Addison just went over, and our REST documentation. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into a workshop portion here. And I will say that I just posted a link in the chat to create a developer team. So if you're signed into your Miro account and you click that link, that'll automatically create a development team for you. And just to reiterate what Addison was saying, you'll know that you have a development team if you see this Build Apps blue button here. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we're in our dev team and build a new app. The first step is to agree to the terms of service here. We'll hit create new app, and I'm just going to call this REST app. And as Addison was saying, make sure you select the dev team. And then we highly encourage people to select the expire user authorization token as a security best practice. What this means is that if you check this off, you'll be issued both a access token and a refresh token as part of the OAuth 2.0 flow, which we'll cover in just a second. If you don't check this off, it means that the access token that you use for OAuth would technically not expire, which can be a bit of a security vulnerability. So just as a best practice, make sure to check that off. And then we can see here, once we've generated the app, our client ID and client secret will also be generated here. And this is what we're going to use as part of the OAuth flow to generate an OAuth access token. So there are a few fields in here that are specific to the REST API, some that are specific to the Web SDK, like Addison went over. And so we're just going to focus on the REST API ones right now. So we've got our client ID and our client secret. And then we're going to go down here to the redirect URI for OAuth 2.0. As is standard for the OAuth 2 flow, you're going to need to specify a redirect URL. And for today's purposes, I'm just going to put a local host URL. And this is the only HTTP URL you can use here. If you're not using localhost, it should be an HTTPS URL. So make sure you hit add once this is done. And this is the redirect URL that'll be referenced for our OAuth flow. And then similarly to the Web SDK, we need to check off the permissions that we want our app to have access to, and ultimately the permissions that we want our REST app to be able to access. So if we check off boards read and boards write, that means that we'll be able to leverage any REST endpoints that read or write to a board. But for instance, if we did not check off any additional permissions here, and let's say we tried to call one of our team's APIs, we would get a 400 error or something similar to that because the token we'll generate wouldn't have the appropriate permissions. So just something to keep in mind. Once you've selected your scopes and permissions, you can actually install the app and generate an OAuth access token directly here from the UI. So when you do this, you want to make sure that you're selecting your developer team. And this will issue an access token and a refresh token because we selected that expire token option in the beginning. And just to kind of let you know, this is kind of a shortcut. So we're generating the full OAuth 2.0 flow in the background here when you go through this flow in the UI. But generally speaking, if you're developing a REST app, you would be working through that OAuth flow locally as opposed to coming here and getting an access token. But for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm just going to copy this access token here directly. Great, so I'm going to take that access token, and then I'm actually going to go right back to our developer documentation that Addison showed earlier, and we're going to go over to the REST API section, and this is where we can get all of our reference docs, as well as guides and tutorials. So over here on the left-hand side, you can see all our different suites of endpoints. So the first thing I'm going to do is demo the create shape endpoint, and for that, I can go over here. Before I dive into this, though, I just want to give a quick kind of high-level overview of our REST API docs. So they're very interactive. You can send test requests directly from the documentation, and you can fill in parameters and such that it's automatically populated over here on the right-hand side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this old access token. I'm going to paste in the one that we just generated, and this will actually carry over to other endpoints. So if you paste in an access token here and then you go to a sticky note endpoint or something different, it should carry through. You won't have to keep adding it. But just a few other things to point out in the documentation here. You'll see a request history for test requests you sent from the docs. You'll notice when you insert a value here, it updates over here. So everything works kind of in real time here. And then when we're ready, we'll hit try it and we'll see the response over here on the right-hand side. So it's a very easy kind of sandbox environment that's part of our documentation, hopefully making it really easy for you guys to jump in and start playing around. So I've already got my access token inserted over here. I'm going to go back to my Miro account here, and I'm going to go to a Miro board that I've just created. But I do want to call out that when you're playing around in your developer environment, make sure that you're in your dev team when you create a new board and not in another team, because the auth access token we just created will only work for the team that we authorized it under. So I can confirm I'm in my dev team, and I'm going to use this sandbox right here. So I'm just going to copy this board ID directly from the URL here. And I'm going to go back to the documentation here and put this in. And then there's a few parameters here to create a shape via the API. We can have the shape say something like hello, and we can make it a rectangle. And then I'm just going to go ahead and try this request. And we'll see we've got a green 201 response here as shown in the docs, which means everything went just fine. We've got an ID for the shape that was created and all of the other details returned here in the response. I'm actually going to save the ID for this shape and put it here in my notepad that you can't see, because I'm going to be using it in just a second. And just for reference, we can show you that this does in fact appear here on the board. So it's just a basic square. I'm actually going to go ahead and create another shape. I'll name this one goodbye. And I'll change some other information about it. Let's see, perhaps I'll change the position here and just move it a little bit to the right. I'll give that a try. And again, we can see this was successful. I'm going to grab the ID of this shape from the response and save this in my little notepad as well. And going back to the board here, we can see we've got two shapes, hello and goodbye. And the next thing I want to show is a new feature that we just recently added to our V2 platform, which are connectors, which are essentially lines. So if we go up here, we will see the connectors suite of endpoints here. And if I go to create connector, as I was saying earlier, you can see that the access token translated over to this other endpoint. So no need to paste that in again, but I will want to grab the board ID once more. Paste this in here. You can see that that updates over here in the preview. And there's a few parameters that are required for connecting two items. So the first would be the end item and the ID of that. So I'm going to go back to my notepad and grab the ID of the second item. I'll paste that in here. And there's a snap to parameter here with a few different options. I'm going to choose auto, which essentially means that the UI will decide where on the shape the line connects. It's usually the anticipated location that you'd expect, but you do have other options if you want to be explicit, such as left, bottom, right, top, etc. I'm going to go back to my notepad and grab the ID for the other object here and mark that as the start item ID. And I'm going to select the same option, auto. And after we give this a try, we'll see we've got a 200 green response there. If we go back to our board, we can see it's a very basic connector that we've connected with these two shapes. So this is a very simple example of leveraging the REST API to manipulate a board and add some items and connect them. But this is kind of the building block for a lot of more complex use cases and more creative ideas. So with that in mind, what does a REST API app look like? So this can look like a lot of different things, as opposed to the Web SDK apps that Addison was showing earlier, which you could access directly from the Miro board in the UI. A REST API app may not necessarily, be accessible from the front end. A lot of times it'll be in a third-party app, kind of running a background job or some kind of administrative task from the back end. So it's something that will interact with the board, but not necessarily from within the UI. where can you find examples of REST API apps? So there's a few quick functional examples that we can point out, like a Miro Slack bot or similar kind of Slack thing. Like our Miro Slack bot leverages the Miro API to send notifications to Slack. But we also have more concrete developer examples in our GitHub repo, which is at GitHub/Miro app. And we have an app examples repository. And this is where you can find all of our developer app examples. So these are comprised of, starter apps, boilerplates, some fun ones like Wordle and Calendar, BlobMaker. The list goes on. So those are all kind of Web SDK apps. But for the REST API, we also have a handful of apps here that you guys can check out as well, including starter apps for the authorization flow in Node and Python, and a few others. And then the other example I wanted to quickly show is just to show kind of the art of the possible. So here's a quick example of a backend application built on handlebars that leverages server-side rendering to create a front-end UI for the REST API, but this all happens outside of a Miro board. So this app on the left-hand side here, you can see is authorizing. That's taking care of the OAuth flow. And then we're uploading a CSV and downloading that CSV. And then this app allows you to take that CSV file and parse it. And then we see here we've got all the details of that CSV file kind of neatly organized. And then the cards are getting created over here in the Miro board based on the REST API calls that were triggered from this third-party application. And you'll see these sticky notes all have tags based on the data that was in the CSV file. So it's just kind of an example of how you could import third-party data, such as a CSV, into a Miro board using the REST API. A very cool way to visualize what may be some otherwise sterile-looking data. And then one other thing that I think would be interesting to those of you attending this webinar is a previous workshop that Addison and I did. And this is a kind of full stack application that we built on React 18 using the Miro REST API to handle a lot of the manipulation of a Miro board. But it also works with React server components, which are a newer kind of technology. So it's a very cool thing for people to check out if they're interested in using Miro and in a more creative capacity and in a full stack app. And now we will kick it off to Addison to cover the live embed.
Awesome, thanks, Will. Awesome, really cool stuff that you can do with the REST API, especially with some of those new endpoints that just came. The last thing that we want to talk about, or the last component, let's say, of our developer platform is our live embed option. And chances are you may have already seen this around the internet if you've been using Miro in the past. Our live embed option is basically a feature of Miro that allows you to embed or use a Miro board in other tools. So some very common instances of this might be inside of the Zoom like the Zoom tool or another tool called Whereby, where if you're ever inside of a Zoom call, you're able to start a board where all of the collaborators on the Zoom call can start using a Miro board and collaborating on whatever project that might be of the current topic. You can also embed these in a lot of other tools, especially like other note-taking tools, etc. But you can also learn a lot more inside of our developer documentation. Again, the same tool docs that we were referencing from before. Right on the side, we do have a Miro live embed section, and you can learn a lot more about the three different options that we have for it, which basically allow you to embed a direct board link, which is the easiest option. It's basically just taking a Miro board link from the URL, changing one of the parameters to live embed, or just selecting one of the options from the share menu, the embed option, and pasting that in a number of different tools. There's two other workflows as well, which is basically using the boards picker, which allows you to choose and create new boards for registered users inside of the tool that you might be building an integration with. So you can, for example, in Coda, type Miro and choose a list of the boards that you're a part of. That's using this option here. And the third one would be the ability to create a editable board for unregistered users. So in the case of the Zoom call before, maybe everybody on the Zoom call doesn't have a Miro account, but you still want people to collaborate inside of Miro. You would use this option so nobody's missing out on the collaboration aspect of it. The last two options, I will say you will need to reach out to us to have it enabled, but all the information on this you can find within our developer documentation. So hopefully it shouldn't be too hard to find.
All right, so now we're going to talk quickly about disseminating your apps and what that might look like. So we have two different kinds of apps in Miro. You can have a public app that is disseminated to our global user base, or you can have a private app that you decide how you want to distribute it and share it by a private link. So yeah, just to cover the two types of apps here. The first would be a marketplace app, which is a public app integration to be leveraged by any of the millions of users of Miro. And so anybody could go to miro.com/marketplace and see your app in our catalog of apps and install and authorize that app. So this is for use cases where you're intending to widely disseminate your app and make it publicly accessible. But I will say that there is an app submission and review process. So we do have a certain kind of set of standards that you'll need to meet to make sure that your app is ready for our marketplace. But you can find all of these details in our developer documentation as well under the app submission section. And I'll just show you real quickly here so that you guys can see it up in close and personal. If you go to the guides section in our docs and scroll down, you'll see a section here for the Miro marketplace, and you'll see a section for submit your app. So this covers what apps are a good fit and how to get them published. On the contrary, there are private apps as well. So these may be more suited to a use case where it's an administrative or more private kind of integration. Maybe it's a background job that you're running for your organization to manage users and teams and things like that. So not something that you want anybody to be able to install, but perhaps it's specific to your account or organization. There's, of course, no app submission or review process required for these private apps, and you can distribute this kind of app only to customers or users that you want via private link. So this private link would look like a little bit like this. If you go into your app that you created and you go to the bottom, you'll see a share app section, and this installation URL is something you could copy and send to someone within your organization or outside of it, and have them install and authorize your application. And now I'll give it back to Addison to cover some inspiration and examples.
Cool. Do you mind if I hop on the screen share one more time?
Of course.
So we want to, now that you know a little bit more about the different types of apps that you can build and the different components that you have inside of Miro, I wanted to give a little bit of some inspiration of some apps that we've built internally, but also some other things that we've seen our developers build using the Miro platform. And the best part about using the developer platform is you can start to integrate some of your other favorite tools that you might be using in your day-to-day directly into Miro, so you don't lose any of the context or any of the collaboration that Miro offers. So you're all able to collaborate together in Miro, and again, not lose any of that data, no matter what other tools you're using. The first thing that I wanted to highlight is something that we use internally called the Miro Asset Catalog. You might be familiar with the situation if you're ever building out like a pitch deck or some slides, or even just need your brand's logo. But you have to open up a ton of different files. You have to dig through a ton of folders, maybe even a bunch of Miro boards, because these assets and these logos might be laying all over the internet. The app that we've built basically houses all of our official brand assets, and through a secure OAuth 2 sign-in, it allows any of our Miro employees to use our assets in our presentations and projects. It looks like this. This is the one that I kind of showed off very quickly before. we can sign in with our OAuth 2. The nice thing about this as well is because this is an integration with another tool, all of these are managed by our brand team. So if our brand team ever updates any of the assets, or they wanted to add some, delete some, etc., all of those updates will get right inside of here. We can scroll through here. We can find maybe some icons. We can even search through them. So like this, drag them onto the board and start to use them right inside of our presentation. So everything's up to date, everything's secure, and we can use it without having to search for everything again. The second thing that I wanted to demo as well is another integration for managing different data. This is a integration that we saw with GitHub, enabling a feature called two-way sync. And basically what this allows you to do is synchronize data between GitHub or one tool and Miro. And I'll just actually do a quick demo of this. If you have used GitHub before, you might be familiar with GitHub issues. And with this integration, what it allows you to do is import these issues into Miro. So let me go ahead and import this first card here. And you'll see this says, welcome to the Miro Developer Platform. That's some information about it, some branding, which is all customizable through a new item called Miro App Cards. You can find more information in our developer documentation as well. But the coolest part about this is everything's totally synced up. So if I make a change inside of here, Miro webinar, I go ahead and save this, you'll see that this is updated here. But this is also, it will update inside of here as well. So the cool part is everything's synced. If I update it in GitHub, it's going to sync back into Miro. So you don't have to worry about managing your data because it's all going to be in sync with each other. This is just one example, again, of this type of flow. And this is a really common flow that we see with other tools as well, in terms of like managing data and making sure everything's in sync. So if you are interested in learning more, again, highly encourage you to head to our developer documentation. We have a ton of different tutorials and a ton of different guides. And even like Will mentioned as well, a ton of app samples that you can go ahead and explore the code, copy it, paste it, use it for however you'd like, and go from there. So I'm going to pass it back over to Will, who I think is going to just let us know about some other cool things that we have going on at Miro.
Thanks, Addison. So yeah, just to kind of start wrapping things up a little bit. So far, we have kind of shown you guys the art of the possible and how to get started. So we hope that the snippets you've seen of how to build on the REST API, the Web SDK, and the live embed are going to ultimately help you all to start building your first apps. And perhaps some of you will eventually be disseminating those on our marketplace. Or maybe you're just more interested in building, again, a more administrative type tool or something on the back end that might import third-party data into Miro. Who knows?
Thanks for joining. We hope you had fun and learned something new. The Miro Developer Platform is empowering developers just like yourself to create the next big thing. If you're looking for more resources, you can find everything to get started on our developer portal at developers.miro.com. If you're looking to get inspired, check out some of our app examples on our GitHub. And if you want to meet other Miro developers or just want to chat directly with our team, join us in our developer Discord. All of the links can be found in the description below. Thanks for joining, and happy building!